Trauma Therapist Podcast Plus listeners can listen to episodes early and ad-free right now. Become a Plus listener by going to Apple Podcasts, searching for the Trauma Therapist Podcast, and signing up today. Welcome to the Trauma Therapist Podcast, a show about the incredible people dedicated to helping those who've experienced trauma. My name is Guy McPherson, and my mission is to raise the awareness of trauma and to inspire each of us to help those around us. Ignacio, are you ready?
Yes.
All right. So 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right, folks, welcome back to the podcast. Very excited to have back Ignacio Rivera. Ignacio, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me again.
Awesome. So Ignacio, who prefers a gender-neutral pronoun they, is an activist, writer, educator, sexual healer, filmmaker, performance artist, and mother. Ignacio has over 20 years of experience on multiple fronts, including economic justice, anti-racist and anti-violence work, as well as mujerista, LGBTQI, and sex-positive movements. Their work is influenced by their lived experience of homelessness, poverty, and sexual trauma. Ignacio's work is also driven by strengths of identifying as a survivor, transgender, Black-Boricua-Taíno, and queer. Welcome back.
Thank
Super
you.
psyched to have you back. Look,
and it's actually 30 years. That's an
damn.
It's an old bio that I got to update, but it's actually been 30 years of activism. Yes.
Wow. Amazing. Amazing. Look, when we first spoke, look, you just exude an energy and a positivity that I loved having on this podcast. I hope this is what this is about, and that's why I wanted to bring you back. Before we get going, share with our listeners again where you're from originally and where you are currently.
I was born and raised in Brooklyn, New York. Lived there for many, many years. But now I am currently, after moving around to different places, I'm currently in Georgia.
Wow.
I'm in the South now. I love it. I love it.
Awesome. So for those listeners maybe who didn't catch our first interview, obviously I read your bio, but how do you explain to people what you do?
It's kind of interesting. I talk about this a lot because usually when people say, "What do you do for work?" And I say, like, how do I say what I do? So I say I work to prevent and end childhood sexual abuse and all forms of sexual violence through using sexual liberation. And so actually I leave the sexual liberation part out and I say I work on ending and preventing childhood sexual abuse. And most often people, say, oh, that's wonderful. God bless you. You're doing such amazing and beautiful work and necessary work. That's great that you work with children. And then I say, oh, I don't work with children. So there the confusion comes in, right? There's like, how do you work on ending childhood sexual abuse when you're not working with children? And so there's a deeper conversation that happens there around that working to prevent and end childhood sexual abuse is everyone's work. Adults, every adult's like job. It's the thing that we should be all striving for, right? So it is, we don't do direct service work. We do cultural shifting root work. We are trying to identify the root causes of childhood sexual abuse. Why does this epidemic continue to happen, and through generations, through centuries? I mean, and this continues on and on and on. So what is the root cause of this thing that we see as so, it's such a silo, right? When we think about childhood sexual abuse, that work is done very separate from the work of anti-violence and work to end rape and sexual assault of adults. So here are two anti-violence kind of movements happening, but they are not together at all. They're very separate, which is concerning. It's concerning. So we do this bridge work. It's like we try to locate the roots, but we're bridging work of many different movements to the work of prevention and ending of childhood sexual abuse, which goes beyond that. The work that it takes to prevent and end it is actually the work that heals us all.
Mm.
So there is a huge loop and a connection to the work that we do to make sure that this doesn't happen, and to our own humanity and our being as to how we see it, deal with it, how we deal with harm doers, all of these things. And the work that I do is with an abolitionist framework. So that blows people's minds too. It's like, how do you do work about childhood sexual abuse that obviously has a harmer, a perpetrator, and you're not talking about justice, criminal, jail? And so that's another huge piece that we talk about. It's like the cycle of this violence for us incorporates the quote unquote criminal justice system. That system only helps to ensure that sexual abuse continues. And so,
Let me pause here for a second.
yeah.
I wanna talk more about that. But before we get there, how did all this start for you?
Mm. Wow, it started from my own experience. I am a survivor of childhood sexual abuse, and also adult rape and sexual violence. And so I have been trying to heal and navigate my healing from what happened to me as a child. And that violence, that trauma reverberates throughout your entire life. Because when you think about it, this is about relational dynamics, right? Our own self, our own self-worth, our own boundaries, our own knowing, and then someone taking complete advantage of that, especially someone that you care about and love. I'll just input here that child sexual abuse is pretty much 90% perpetrated by people we know. So I just want to put that out there very clearly, especially as we do campaigns about stranger
Mm-hmm.
danger and things like
Mm-hmm.
that, which is a very much, 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 much smaller percentage. We're dealing with people we know, we see every single day. So I've been trying to heal through that, and through my healing and trying to find words to describe it at the same time as like navigating relationships, failing in relationships, failing in my own finding my own boundaries, being a people pleaser, failing in so many ways, because I haven't gotten to heal from this violence and this trauma. So one of the things that kept coming up for me was sex. Like, sex is a topic that is never, ever, ever, ever discussed when talking about preventing childhood sexual abuse, which is actually mind blowing to me, right? So sex,
What do you mean?
the topic of sex doesn't even exist within trying to heal or talk about child sex. We talk about it as there was an evil harm doer, and here is a victim. That harm doer must be punished, right?
Mm-hmm.
We think about it in those ways, and then we're not thinking about it in this grander kind of a way. Like I lost my train of thought. I'm sorry. You were asking me.
Well, you said something very interesting to me. You said when we're talking about the subject
Oh yeah.
of childhood sexual abuse, we don't talk about sex.
No, 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 no. Right.
Right.
So right. So we kind of yeah, we push that under. We push that under because like our sex, which is basically our body, our reactions, our desires, all of this stuff is what is completely altered from those
Mm-hmm.
encounters. That is all completely altered. So when we see people who are survivors and they're saying, my relationships are not well, I can't hold on to a relationship or whatever, because the relational dynamic was completely altered right in the beginning. We're talking about trust, right? Relationships are built on trust. They're built on trust and care and curiosity, and all of that was taken away. So how do we build relationships when the very core of how we build relationship was completely damaged, and we don't talk about it, right? We don't really talk about it. We talk about it as, oh, this incident, a horrible incident that happened, but because they're so young, they'll forget about it.
Mm-hmm.
They're resilient, right? Children are resilient
Right.
and they will survive. Yeah, they're resilient. But that alters your DNA. Like it just alters, this trauma is inside of you, right? So in order to talk about what happened, we need to be talking about all types of relationships, how we navigate friendships, loverships, how we navigate being in long-term relationships. A lot of us have a difficulty doing that because of trust, and because of not understanding our own boundaries, because they were just demolished at a young age. This is when we learn what is a boundary? Well, how do I say no to someone? How do I say yes? How do I say, give me a moment to think about this? So we don't learn those things. We learn that people have power over us, and we navigate like that. And so conversating about sex, relational dynamics and stuff is very important. But instead, we only talk about it in the justice sense. Something was wrong. Somebody did something wrong to you, and now that person has to suffer. So once that person gets in trouble, gets put in jail, gets to suffer, then it's over. And it really isn't. It is not over. Like, this trauma is a trauma that unfortunately stays with you. Stays with you for a long, long time, if not forever. It changes in a lot of ways, but it is very deep and intense sort of trauma. We understand the trauma that people go through when a loved one dies. We actually have space for mourning for those things. We actually can understand 10 years later when somebody says, yeah, my father died 10 years ago. And we're like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. Like,
Mm-hmm.
that is horrible. I could totally understand that. We can really empathize with 10 years passing and still someone deeply crying over the loved one. But we have no space for that when it comes to someone completely violated my body repeatedly for years when I was a child. I don't know how to have a relationship. Oh, that's really sad. That's too bad. We have no way to kind of grapple and discuss that without shaming, silencing. It's usually around, I have to silence this about me, or there's a lot of shame that I can't move past this. I can't go on. I can't figure this out. And a lot of it is, I think it can be figured out, but I think that we are in a system that doesn't support survivors in the way that we need to be supported. And we need to be talking about this on a larger scale, not as these incidences that happen here and there. This actually happens every day, everywhere, all the time. Right now, there's so many children being sexually assaulted right now. There are people being raped, men and women. It happens. And so we have to grapple with that reality and understand the root causes of it so that we can shift those root causes. And that is really the stuff that we talk about at the Heal Project. That's why we're called the Heal Project. In order for these things to end, we must heal. We heal to end all of this. And so what is healing? It is coming back into ourselves, and really it's about this self-reflection. It's about really digging into ourselves and understanding who we are. I think when violence kind of comes into our life, it just completely shifts everything, and we have to get back to a groundedness. And that's really difficult to do when the trauma that you have experienced is invisible in some ways. It's pretty invisible in some ways.
How did you talked about your own experience. How did you manage and deal and begin to heal? And obviously, not that the healing is over, but
No.
when you were younger, what did that process look like
Yeah.
for you?
Um, it was rough. I didn't even know where to begin. For me, my young years were suicidal. I attempted suicide on several occasions, and somebody wanted me here because it never worked. But
Wow.
that's how desperate I was. I just couldn't. I,
What age are we talking?
the Unfortunately, the first time I tried to take my life, I was 8 years old. So, and I think about that a lot. The pain that an 8-year-old holds, to say it's so much easier to take a handful of pills. Like, where did I even get that thought from,
Wow.
And so the healing that I'm still in healing. I'm still do many things to heal. The work that I do is healing for me. Um, it it took me a while to get into therapy, which I'll say right now is not for everyone. Talk therapy is for some people, not for all, but it's something that helped me. And so getting into talk therapy was one thing, but also talking to other people. This work that I do is about community healing, right? It's about not being alone because most survivors feel like they're alone. This is about talking to other people. So I started talking to a lot more people and finding other survivors and really forming community with them and being able to share my story, because that's one huge thing for someone to be able to share their story when their story, one, was probably never heard or very much altered for the audience, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think about my own story and telling my mom or my brother or something about when these things happen. As a survivor, we all know that when we start talking about it, we take into account the other person's perception. We think about what they can hold and what they can handle. And then we change the story so that they won't blow up or want to kill someone or something. So it's like we're holding the trauma, the healing, and then as we tell people, it's almost like we hold that space as well, um, because it goes, people just don't know how to handle that because we don't have the capacity. And so that's a part of that healing too, the capacity to hold that. How does one hold a story when a child or even an adult tells you this happened to me? How do we deal with that? And that even knowing that, how to respond to that is a healing piece.
What was it like when I mean, when one shares a story, there's the understanding that there's someone on the opposite end of that, like you're just saying, they're listening to a certain degree. What was it like when you encountered someone who heard you?
Mm, wow. Yeah, that's just like tears, lots of crying and gratitude. Um, it took a long time. It took a very, very, very long time for me disclosing for someone to really have the capacity. And this is not saying anything bad about the people that didn't, because it takes a lot to be able to hold that space. Some people don't have the capacity. They're going through their own stuff. So, but it took a long time for someone to kind of say, wow, that's horrible. I'm so sorry that happened to you. Like, how are you dealing with this now? What could I do to support you? Um, they just asked questions. They were curious. That's one thing. They were like, thank you for telling me. They were curious about what happened and they asked follow-up questions. A lot of times it's something that's said and it's done because it's so heavy. Nobody knows how to pick that up. It's just like, you tell somebody, hey, this happened to me from this age to this age. The person that did it. It happened in the house. Like they're in shock too. They're in total shock. So this violence doesn't only affect me, it affects me more so, but it also affects the people that I tell. It affects
Mhm.
the family, it affects everyone. So it is not just something that I'm going through. It's what everyone goes through. My family is still going through it, even though they don't want to talk about it, because it's something that they're holding inside of them, right? And as I said before, 90% of these things happen with people that we know. So we're literally navigating or not every day, seeing people that we know are have done harm, have experienced harm, um, and we don't know how to address it. And and sometimes that's why it's very, I guess, I don't want to downplay it, but I was going to say the simplest thing to do is to just throw someone away, right? Because that's just like, well, they're horrible, they're
Mhm.
violent, they're a monster. So I never want to see them again. And I'm going to tell everybody else never to talk to them or never to do this or never to do that, right? And that is a very complicated place to be, a very complicated place to be because,
You're talking about the perpetrator?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, for both sides, it's a very complicated place to be because again, what we try to do at the Heal Project is we want to get out of this kind of language of monsters and saints. There is no such thing. There really is. We as humans all have the capacity and the capability to harm. And most of us already have. Why? Because we're human. Why? Because we learn through our mistakes, right? And usually when we have a mishap and someone or a community is telling us that this is not the way to do it with learning, growth, then something can change. But when it is counteracted with, rapists should be raped too. Rapists should be put in jail. You do this. We're categorizing everyone in just one bubble, the monster. And just as survivors are complicated and complex, so are harm doers. And we need to really come to terms with that, because when we do, then we can see the humanity and the healing in all of us. If we don't, then we continue in a cycle of using carceral tools to get to some sort of healing or justice. And I mean, like using how prisons work, it's like carceral. It's like how we do things and throwing people under the bus or saying that they're subhuman. All these things. It takes away any sort of possible healing for someone, right? And the idea that a person like that can never be healed is also very damning, because it literally says, if you have harmed one time, that's it. You're done. You're done. In reality, nobody wants to harm. I mean, I'm assuming nobody really wants to harm, but harm happens, right?
Right. But to be fair, it is on a continuum of sorts.
Yes, absolutely.
Right. If I tell a lie or curse at someone, and then we might say on the opposite end of the continuum, rape or sexual abuse or prolonged sexual abuse. I mean, you talked about the word monster, but wouldn't it be fair to say that maybe someone isn't a monster? And you could argue that some people are, but maybe that person committed a monstrous act.
Yeah, we can say that a person committed a monstrous act. Yes.
Right. Wouldn't it be fair to say that rape is a monstrous act? How do we talk about it? I mean, I guess I would say that can't we have space for the anger that comes with that?
Well, you just said something. You said rape is a monstrous act. Yes, it can be. It could be a monstrous act, and it could be a mistake, and it could be, right? Because when we talk about the definitions of things, all of these definitions are legal definitions.
Right.
So that is all about legality. So when we talk about let's talk about teenagers who are, trying to have sex in something, and there's a mishap. And I say mishap because maybe there was a miscommunication. Someone felt a certain way, and then afterwards, and this is a huge segment of what happens. It's people trying to figure things out. And so then in the legal terms, when you start using like, this person did something to me. Yes, there's absolutely room for anger. I think that we need to hold space for rage and anger and all those things, but that rage and anger should not be around the harm of another person, right? So transformative justice, you've heard of this. Transformative justice is like, how do we deal with harm without causing more harm? Plain and simple. How can I heal from this stuff and not say, I want to heal, but I want you to die. I want to heal, but I want you to be raped. Right. I want to heal, but I think you should be in jail for the rest of your life and be raped by 5 men every day. Because that's rage. And I'm for the rage. I think it's very, very important. And most times we tell people to hide that. No, I think there's room for rage, anger. There's room for throwing things around. I think there's room for all of it. And there's also room for a different way of dealing with harm, right? Outside of this criminal justice system, because what it does, it only creates more harm. It does not deal with the problem.
Was this view / perspective that you have right now, did this evolve? Did you get to this point?
In some ways, but not really. Like, for instance, I was interviewed once about, about my harm doer, and they said, what what would you have wanted to happen? Would you have wanted to call the police and, go through the system? And it was definitely a no, definitely a no. And so, and there are a lot of survivors that will say, absolutely not. Like, that's not the route I want to go, but it's the only route that is available. So sometimes people have to go through that route for a lot of different reasons. And again, this is not downing people because we use the system when we need it, right? Like sometimes people absolutely have to use it because they're in danger, immediate stuff, and no one else is there to help them because it's such a siloed type of thing. There are when I was doing that interview, that person actually said to me that all the other people that they interviewed, I think a majority of them said the same thing, that they wouldn't want to have to go through legal systems. And because the legal system was the only thing available, then they felt silenced and didn't know where to go because that's the only way to go. It's like, oh, that happened. Let's call the cops. So, as I said before,
And you didn't want to do that because
it was my family member.
Right.
And so what I wanted, literally what I wanted, every time I think about it, everybody asks me, what would you have wanted? For it to stop and for people to know about it and so that they could support and help me. That's it. Actually, I never even considered about my harm doer. I was thinking about me. I just wanted it. I want that to be done. I want my parents to know, and I want some support. That was all that I wanted. Yeah, that was what I wanted as a young person. But that's my thing. Everyone is different, and this is very subjective.
Right.
This is why this is not an easy thing to say. Monster, survivor, and this is the route we go. None of it is like that. It's all very, very subjective. I think all these situations are very different, but the legalities do not make them subjective. It is very much one person did something wrong, the other person was the receiver of that harm, and now somebody has to be punished.
When did you found the Heal Project?
It's probably going to be 8 years ago. But the idea of the Heal Project was probably 15, 20 years ago, because I did a one-person show at the time about my experience as a survivor. And I traveled with that show for about 4 years. And through that show, it was very interactive with my audience. And so I got a lot of notes from my audiences. My show developed because of that interaction and because of the amount of people that were disclosing to me that had never disclosed to anyone else. Actually, after my shows, it was just basically people disclosing to me about what had happened to them. So I said, well, this is a need. I want to start the Heal Project. And the Heal Project actually back then stood for Healing Encountered Altered Lives. Yeah, Healing Encounters Altered Lives. And so I put it out and being like, I want to hear stories of people and, sharing what your stories are. And at that point, 20 years ago, people were not ready. They were not ready to talk about their stories. They were like, no, 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 I want to tell you. I don't want to tell anybody else.
Right.
So the idea of the Heal Project, was there and I tried to get it started, but they weren't ready. Then 20 years later, there's some funding for specifically how to prevent and end childhood sexual abuse. And I was like, I'm going to pitch my idea. And I did. And so I got funding for it to start.
Wow. So how do you work now? What do you do there at the Heal Project?
At the Heal Project, we do, in the beginning, our work has really, I love the work that we do because it's really like shifted in ways, the way we present the work through our engagement with people. So in the beginning, we did a lot of media creation. So on YouTube, we have tons of videos, just media that we created on how to educate folks on different things. And so I have Pure Love Talks is a talk show, 2 seasons that I did with my adult daughter. And it was basically a talk show about how I raised her in a sex positive household, what it was for her to have a parent who was a survivor. And we talk about sex, sexual orientation, all types of stuff. So we did 2 seasons of that with my daughter. Then we had Connecting the Dots, which was a show that we take everyday media, like any movie, any song, any book, anything, and basically say we could take any piece of media and turn it into an educational opportunity to talk about TSA prevention. And so we prove that every time by picking these medias. I would have a guest come on and we talk about that show or that book and really delve into those things. So it's connecting the dots that we can be engaging with our children and stuff around this topic. And it doesn't have to be the one day we need to talk about this particular thing, but it's weaved into our lives, right? And then we have Caution Unrestricted, which is a platform where my co-executive director and myself, we are talking about our experiences as survivors. And we had the first season was called Bad Survivor. And it's kind of a sarcastic, a program where we say what we want and how we want to do it. So this is a space where we don't think about how other people are going to perceive this. We are going to say what we want to say. So we talked about bad survivors, how people, basically survivors that need to be heard, have to be a particular look. The sexual assault had to be a particular thing. You had to be a perfect survivor to get help, right? So we did 5 episodes on that. And then we did in the second season called Family Dirt. And we talked about basically the origins of our family and the first time we understood our sense of self. And, so basically family dynamics and how family dynamics really works to either maintain or stop this cycle of sexual abuse. So a lot of media work, but right now we do lots of workshops and trainings. We do retreats for survivors to get to their healing. And then we're developing a training for organizations and for when we say healers. So when I say healer, I'm talking about therapists, sex therapists, guidance counselors, anybody who holds space for somebody else's emotions. Like we do a lot of training with healers, people who help folks navigate healing, because the people who are holding those spaces also need to be deepening their own sense of healing in order to hold someone else's healing, right? And we teach a lot of stuff around how to be abolitionist in doing this work, how to not use carceral logic doing this work, like how do we do this work very differently than the last 30 years that we've been doing this work, right? How do we shift how we talk about sexual violence? And really, for me, it's we talk about sexual violence after an attack, an assault, or a mishap has happened. It's not integrated. We're not talking about, and not even sexual violence, or just relational dynamics. Relational dynamics. We don't have a grasp on that. We have a better grasp on fantasy, love at first sight, things like that. Like we have things that people would love. I mean, this is wonderful if that could actually happen for everybody, but it's not. Like we have a particular learning and a knowing that we have to have about ourselves in order to navigate this world, right? It's about when we know ourselves, it is about how we get to understand our own boundaries, because that is how people can respect us and love us, when we understand ourselves. And so healing is about getting to ourselves. When we talk about family, it's like we enter into a family that basically, we enter into a family that's already made, right? That they're telling us, how life is and how we got to be. Sometimes they even tell us what career we should have or what clothes we should wear and things like that. We get the ideas, we get our sense of self from our family of origin or from our foster care, from the, wherever we grew up. So it's about going back to how we developed our sense of self and being curious about these things, because there is healing to be done, because we live in this system. Like you cannot tell me that I think every person I've talked to, every time the people have something in their childhood, right?
Yeah.
Because it is the beginning. If no one had it, it doesn't make sense, right? Because as humans, we will have trauma, because this is about trial and error, learning. And then when we get older, we have retrospect, right? We're like, in retrospect. So we're taking that retrospective power and going back. And now we are trying to go to it's like we're going to the roots, ripping it out and replanting. That's we got to rip out those roots, those bad roots, or those rotten roots that's killing the tree, and then get a new one and put it back in. And what is that? And so what is this the new roots? And
what are the rotten roots? Is that the naive way or the limited way of looking at what abuse is? What are those rotten roots that need to be pulled out?
I think one thing that we should be grappling with is and I think people are doing it now, which I'm loving. It's rethinking the relationships that adults have with children, specifically parents and their children. We see it all on social media now, like how to be a gentle parent, how to, like how not to yell to your kids and stuff. It's like all this, there's so much information now about stuff that my parents didn't know and their parents didn't know and stuff. So when we think about generations, we laugh about it. Like my generation was the generation that kids were being abducted. Parents didn't know anything about safety and stuff, even before that, right? We have so much trauma stories about that, right? And it's like, because every generation, we're learning more and more. And we've come to a place where we're like, oh, that's right. We have a responsibility to children, but we also don't have to completely control their lives, right? We don't like our jobs as parents, that I think needs to have a grand shift, and which is happening right now, because parents are actually seeing their children as people that are growing up. Right. And in the past, it was like property. It is changing children from property to people. And when we change, when they're property in this world, and again, this is not about saying people are bad. This is about the system that we live in, fast-paced system that shows us when we have our children, well, what are we preparing our children for when they're born? Like, what do we prepare them for? We prepare them to go to school so that they can go to work. So we teach our children how to manage themselves enough to sit in a classroom for 8 hours and to get lesson so that they could be good to go on. So the goal of our lives is in this system, this capitalist system. Right. It's about school, work, and that's the measure of success, right? And even marriage is a measure of success, right? You go to school, go to a good school, get a good job, get married, boom, you're living the dream. That's the life, right? That's the life we've been told is the dream. But now that's not the dream for many people. Everything has shifted. People, the way people buy houses, people and relationships, marriage has changed. The way we raise children has changed. So all of this, I'm not saying anything new at all. This is all in the works already. People are realizing the way that we have managed the relational dynamics with adults and children has severely deteriorated people's sense of self and sense of knowing, and it's all based on something else. So that, I think, is one piece of the root. There's many things, like I don't think you could just pinpoint one thing. There's just so many things that's why when we have this conversation, it's like, it's not as easy as that's a monster. It's so many things. It's so many things that it has to be so integrated into how we live. And it is basically, not basically, but I keep thinking about it as we are trying to understand our sense of selves, and we have to rethink what our goals are, right? What are our goals, which is a very difficult thing to do when mostly what we're trying to do in this world is survive. That's
Ignacio, man. It's like we've opened up a can of worms here. There's so many ways to go about this, and now I've got to have you back again, and sooner than later. I mean, there's so many integral, important, vital topics that you're bringing up here that I love to have as part of this podcast. Look, what's the best way for people to learn more about you and the work you're doing?
Now you can go to either Heal to End, HEAL, the number 2 END, .org, so heal2end.org, or you can check out my personal website, which is igrivera.com. Yeah, and through there you can contact. We got contact stuff on our YouTube channel, Heal to End. Check out videos. Yeah.
All right. We'll have all that linked up here at the show notes page at the traumatherapistpodcast.com. Ignacio, love it. Love having you on here. Appreciate your I appreciate you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. We'll be in touch.
All right.